Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the show. Today we sit down with Eric Nielsen, who is the co-founder and president of Sunder. They are a solar company here based in Salt Lake, and it was a really great conversation with Eric. He's very down to earth. He tells his story, his journey from coming out of college, working with a couple of other door-to-door companies, ultimately founding Sunder, getting it off the ground, and growing over the last 5 years into a really amazing group. So excited for you guys to hear his advice, his story, and with that, let's jump in. All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of the show. Today, we're privileged to have Eric Nielsen, who is the co-founder and president at Sunder Energy, a solar company based in Sandy. Is that right?
We're in South Jordan now.
South Jordan now, sorry.
Yeah,
previously Sandy. So excited to have you in, Eric. Thanks for making the time.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, love it, man. We were talking before the show started here. We have a few mutual connections, but I always find it interesting to hear a little bit about your upbringing and any influences from your parents or friends or experiences that you feel like molded you to who you are today.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Logan, Utah, so North Country here in Utah, and was raised in an amazing home, loving parents. I have 3 siblings. My dad was an entrepreneur. He was, at least I've been told, he was the first Domino's Pizza franchisee in the state of Utah. Wow, so
nice. He
had come to BYU, was raised in California, and started working at a place called Pizza Express. There were 2 locations, Provo and Orem, and then I guess Domino's bought that chain, and so they became Domino's stores, and then we kind of bought into that whole thing and were raised in that environment, the Domino's environment. So got to watch my dad work really, really hard. His hours were basically 11 a.m. to like 1 a.m. And, he was hiring, firing, dealing with issues, dealing with the ups and downs of the food business. And so he did a great job involving us in the business. We all worked there as soon as we could, 14, 15 years old. And then he would take us to work with him, and we just learned a lot from him. But a great man. My mom was a homemaker, but she actually is like capable of running a big company. Like, she's very on it and really organized and has just been a great mother to me. So I was raised in a neighborhood in Cache Valley where a lot of the really well-to-do, really wealthy people lived, but because it's a small town, not everyone in the neighborhood was really well-to-do. So we were kind of middle class, but had, friends in the neighborhood with private jets and mansions and supercars and all the things. So that really had an impact on me as far as the people that I was able to rub shoulders with and kind of how I got to learn the business world and what these different people did. But loved it in Logan. Grew up fishing, camping, playing outside all the time, just having a good time. So,
yeah, that's great. Is your family still involved in the pizza business, Domino's?
They're passively involved still. So my dad's retired, but he still has some ownership in the stores, and I think he'll be out by the time he's 70 or something like that. Okay. So yeah, cool. He's got a plan in place, but not having to show up every day for it.
Yeah, love it. And then I read that you went to Utah State, right? Yep. So stayed in Logan for school. What was your mentality going into school? And you saw your dad be an entrepreneur. Yeah. Did you know what you wanted to study, what you wanted to do when you got out of school?
I didn't fully know. I know in high school I had an econ class that I loved and I was really good at, and then had some exposure to finance, accounting, and I struggled in that area. So going into college, I was like, you know what? I'm going to do an econ degree, and then I'm going to do a finance degree as well because I need help in that department. And I actually thought I was going to take more of a traditional, like, banking, climb the ladder type, career trajectory. And so that was how I initially felt going into school. But I had applied to BYU, Utah, and Utah State. And of course, being from Logan, I had some loyalties to Utah State, but I was kind of on my own at that point financially. and I got into all three. BYU didn't give me any money. So I was like, all right, that's going to be tough. And then I got like a partial to the U, and then I got a full ride to Utah State. So I was like, well, I can stay home. I can have everything covered, and I'm just going to do it up here. I like the school. So
was that academic scholarship or sport? Okay. That's impressive.
Yeah. I mean, I was happy at the time because I was kind of on my own. So
That's great. So you're doing econ. I saw you later got an MBA at Ohio State.
Yep.
So was that, did you have some work experience before that MBA, or did you go straight into it?
Yeah. So I had gotten into direct sales right when I got off of an LDS mission, and I thought it was a means to an end. I'll kind of pay for my living expenses that way and learn a few things. I was learning how to sell, and I thought that was valuable. And I had actually taken a job with JP Morgan Chase, and thought I was going to have one last summer selling alarm systems. And got convinced by a sales leader that my story would be a lot more interesting going into grad school, which was my goal, if I stayed in sales and managing teams, than it would if I just went and became a banker. And so I believed him, bought in, and did that for a few years in between grad school, and so undergrad and grad school.
Got it.
Yeah.
And was the role at JP Morgan, was it in like their commercial banking division?
It was not a prestigious role. Okay. It was like, something lower on the totem pole.
Sure.
And by the time, I'm a first generation college grad. Like my dad and grandpa and great grandpa, they were all entrepreneurs, but none of them finished college.
Yeah.
And so for me, by the time I realized like the investment banking track or private wealth management track, it was like, oh, I'm a senior in college, and I've missed all these things that I have to do.
It's so competitive now. It's insane. Kids are doing internships when they're, sophomores and freshmen. It's kind of crazy, that process.
I learned there were Utah State students in the investment banking club at BYU. They drive down.
Really?
And they then got opportunities that we didn't see. So I was like, oh my gosh, I'm way behind on this.
Yeah, it's wild. It's wild. Well, that's really, interesting. So was that with Vivint, or who were you with?
So I was with Vivint for the first 2.5 years. And then I transitioned. There was a company called Pinnacle Security in the space at the time, and thought it would be a better fit for my family members and friends that I had brought into the industry. And did 3 years there, and then went to grad school after that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you have all this experience doing direct sales. Again, go back to like the mentality thing with going to Ohio State. Was that, hey, I'm going to do a big career shift here and do something in finance or something else?
Yeah. I thought I was going to go into marketing at that point. So sales and marketing. I realized I had a passion for sales. I love working with people, and, saw some good success with that. So I was like, all right, there aren't a lot of sales leaders that I know that have put that to the side and gone and furthered education. And I think I can really add some value with the background that I had. And so I jumped into the program, and similar to my undergrad choice, it was largely driven by the financial side of what grad school would cost me and whatever. So I applied to a bunch of schools, got into some, but chose Ohio State. They were really generous with the package they offered, and jumped in and realized pretty quickly, like, no one in grad school wanted to really talk about sales. So it was like, it was the mysterious department that they kind of shove off into its own island. And we had all the traditional disciplines that were talked about, but it was like, I'd always raise my hand and be like, where do these numbers come from? Like, why aren't we talking about sales and the function within a business and how to operate effectively, with a sales department? And so I was actually really surprised, but it was intriguing to me, because I was like, clearly there's a need for these types of topics to be discussed or to be worked on. And so first year, that year between year 1 and year 2, you do an internship, and it's really important that you get a good internship. And so I got on with a company called Abbott Laboratories in their marketing department, and great company, had a good time, but I learned very quickly in big corporate America, they don't really want you to change much, and your impact isn't really felt in the business very well. And we spent a whole lot of time creating slide decks and preparing for one meeting a week or whatever it was. And I was like, this is so boring. I can't do this.
Yeah.
So spinning out of that into year 2, some friends of mine at Vivint that I had worked with in the past kind of linked me up with a guy named Todd Santiago at Vivint. And he thought, hey, this is kind of a combination that we don't see a lot with the education and the experience knocking doors and leading teams. And so they recruited me in to work on some special projects for Vivint. And my wife and I and our daughter moved back to Utah at that point, just after grad school.
That's great. Yeah, it's interesting going back to your decision to go work for JPMorgan Chase or go do direct sales. I went to BYU and I was kind of on a similar track, like head down. I want to be the finance guy or have the sexy job.
Go to New York
or LA. Yeah. And I did. I went to LA, but I have buddies now looking back where they did what you did, and they're like, hey, I'm going to go do direct sales or knock doors or whatever, build a team. Yeah. And they're crushing it, right? Relative to, your typical route going to a JP or, it's like you're going to go make maybe $100,000 a year and you're going to get a 10% bump and you
work
can
like a dog,
work a ton and it can be kind of boring. And you gotta really know that that's your path and feel like you can do that for a while if you're going to go that way. Cause there's a lot of ways to make money. And if your goal is freedom, autonomy, more entrepreneurship like that, it doesn't have to be the typical route or the sexy, you know what I mean? So I like that. I think that's great. Okay. So you come back to Vivint. So then were you no longer on the doors at that point? It was more kind of corporate role.
Yeah. They first had me take over retail, which was a new thing that they had started. And we kind of pivoted strategy and sold through, indirect partners and brick and mortar, which was really cool to figure that out. And then, they had me start a home builders program, which we got some really good traction on early. And then eventually what we came to was we would have these incredible opportunities with partnerships or potential partnerships. And the seasonality of the business was a problem for some of these initiatives we were lining up. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to like really put my head down and start a year-round thing. And I had a couple sales managers within the business that saw the vision and kind of bought in. And we were kind of just this secret initiative that not many people even internally knew about. And it started working really well to get year-round teams going. And Casey Baugh, who I think kind of saw what we were doing. He was like, hey, I can throw some gasoline on this and like we'll really take this to the next level. So we built what was called at the time the GM program, which was our first real effort to do year-round. And that's like move people to markets, build with local talent, do all that. And so Casey like infused the program with support and recruits and stuff. And I think when I left, we were 25 or 30 offices spread throughout the country selling year round, which opened up new business development opportunities for us. And I think was a good thing for the business at the time.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. Casey, he was on the show. He's got his own podcast. He's a stud. That guy's great. And that was in alarms.
Yeah, that was all smart home. Yeah.
Okay. Yep. So, all right. And then I guess what year was that about?
That was, I think I started during my second year. It was like late 2013, early 2014.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
And then all of 2014 and 15.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then from there, what was the next move, and what was the catalyst to kind of leaving Vivint or going somewhere else?
Yeah. So a few months after grad school, some former colleagues of mine from the Pinnacle days started a company called LGCY Power, or they were preparing to start that.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember meeting with them, and they're like, "Hey, you should come do this with us." When I left to grad school, I had kind of given they call it downline to them. And so a lot of my connections and guys were working within their org.
Sure.
And I was like, you know what? I just committed to Todd. Like, I got to see this thing through at Vivint. Good luck. But I got a lot of exposure to the solar business within Vivint, and would go and pitch companies together with Vivint Solar and Vivint kind of at, hip to hip. And I just really took a liking to the solar business and just thought, there's so much opportunity here. It's a really new kind of emerging part of the solar industry, and resi solar just really kind of got my heart. And so after a couple of years at Vivint, the legacy guys convinced me to come over and join forces with them. And I did that for, I think, almost 4 years.
And what was that role with Legacy?
Yeah, at first it was like, just come in and get to work. Like, I think my title was VP of Sales Strategy. And then after a quarter or two, I was running pretty much all of sales at Legacy, and did that for the remainder of my time there.
Yeah, that's great. And at Vivint, you mentioned you had some exposure to the solar side. When did Vivint Solar start? And were you ever part of that whole thing, or was it?
I don't know the exact year. It was early 2010s sometime, but like when I had come back to Utah, the solar business was still in the same building as the smart home business. So we were like rubbing shoulders with those guys all the time, eating lunch together. Like it sort of felt like one business at that point.
Okay.
So they started out pretty small and then really caught momentum. And I think you probably know their story. I mean, it was super successful.
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely. Okay. And then LGCY Power. So how was that experience, and kind of what did you take away from your 4-ish years there?
Yeah. I mean, we were at the time exclusive to a company called Sunrun, which is the same company that ended up buying Vivint Solar. And we were kind of the direct sales arm for Sunrun, but a separate company, and learned a ton in that. So had a lot of exposure to the owners of the business, and kind of got to see how a solar sales company operates, help build it really with them, and help recruit talent both on the sales side and on the corporate side. I think the exposure I had to Sunrun was probably the biggest benefit to that role. So they had gone public just prior to me getting there. And so learning the importance of forecasting, like being able to call your business and stand behind it and do the things it takes to like be compliant with what a public company needs to be compliant with. Like, we kind of by extension had to do that, even though we were private, and made some dear friends that I call friends today, good friends from those Sunrun days, and got to know the owners of Sunrun and the founders and kind of the early people that helped build that business. And they've had a pretty good run throughout the years. So just relationships. And I think that's probably going to be my takeaway from most experiences in life, is just the relationships and the memories and the lessons that we learn together working on important things.
Yeah, it's so important. Over time, those relationships develop, and you can go back to them, your resources, and they make connections for you. And it's so important to keep those up.
For sure.
So you mentioned Sunrun and how Legacy was basically a dealer for them.
Yeah.
I'm curious, and I just don't really understand it. How does solar companies, so are you selling Sunrun products? Are Sunrun manufacturing the panels? You're out just like putting them up on the roofs under the Legacy name?
Yeah.
Like how does that model
work? In a dealer model like that, the interesting thing about solar is like there's so many companies involved in the process. So, I mean, and then you have governments even behind that are funding R&D for different renewables parts and pieces, and then funneling money into the finance side. Like there's just a lot at play. And then on the other side of that, you're competing against utility companies, many of which are owned by some of the most wealthy individuals in the world who do not necessarily love what we're doing. And then you have the politics of it all. So, I mean, you have usually equipment manufacturers that kind of vary throughout the value chain. Like you have, I mean, cabling and racking and rail and solar panels and batteries and all the components that go into a solar system. And those are usually made by like big industrial companies. It's like you even see just big names that you would know, like Panasonic, and LG's been in the space, and Tesla. So usually these are multi-billion-dollar companies. And then you have distribution usually. So companies, big companies in the US that kind of aggregate all the different components for solar. So that's kind of step 2 in the process. And then you have the finance company that for 95+% of the industry on the resi side, they're helping to finance the whole system. And there are a variety of companies that exist in that space. And then you have the solar installer. And then you have sometimes even a separate sales company. And so you just have all of these people involved, not to mention the software companies that come to play. But I think Sunrun is probably more vertically integrated than most, where they do a lot of the financing, they do the installation for most of their jobs, and they have an internal sales force. But even that isn't fully integrated. So I don't think there's a single company in the space that's fully vertically integrated.
Okay. But, so is Legacy like a bolt on for Sunrun? Like, hey, you guys are going to rep us, go sell. We'll install or handle some of the financing, the back end.
Yeah. At the time they've kind of pivoted since I left.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. That makes sense. Okay. And we'll dive in a little bit more on that because it's super interesting. So
cool.
Transitioning to Sunder.
Yeah.
So you've been at Legacy for 4 years. Again, going kind of catalyst here. You're sitting there at Legacy. What was the thought process? Like, I'm going to do this on my own. Now's the time.
Well, that wasn't necessarily in my mind at the time. There was a lot of interesting stuff happening both in the industry and within that company at the time. And I was kind of like, you know what? I'm going to resign. I'm going to take some time and figure out what I want to do. And there's a really good friend of mine, Cody Guyman, who was at Qualtrics at the time. And this was like prior to their first sale. And I was just like, hey, you got anything for me? Like, I might want to get into SaaS and figure that out. And then I had a mentor that was starting a software company and he wanted me to come run that. And so I thought it was going to be a month or two where I could like really try to figure out what I was going to do. And it ended up being about a week because so many people were reaching out and saying, you can't get out of the space and we got to do this and you got to do something on your own. We trust you. You have a great name. And so after about a week of contemplating, like, am I really going to do this or am I going to leave the industry and figure something else out? I decided that I was going to do it. And at the time I was like, you know what, this might end up being me and 5 people and we'll see what we can do. Or, of course, people like us, you want to grow something big and do it well and whatever. So that was the dream, was to build something really big and successful and impactful. But my plan, kind of worst case, was like it might just be me and a handful of people. So so started Sunder and had a partner jump in fairly quickly thereafter, Max Britton, who's incredible. And we wanted to do it differently than the way that most companies in the space were doing it. And the word Sunder means to break apart. And so of course you have like we're breaking apart monopolies, we're breaking apart the carbon industry, like we're breaking apart unfairness, and we're giving you choice.
Mm-hmm.
But the real reason was we wanted to break apart from some of the bad that the industry had kind of created over 20, 30 years of its existence. And that's not just solar, that's selling, direct sales in general.
Sure.
And so we, established our core values really early and a mission, and ended up building a pretty good company.
Yeah,
So,
that's great. And you mentioned your partner, Max, you said?
yeah. Yeah.
How important is having a partner been to you in the success of Sunder? And how'd you choose Max, or how'd you guys come together?
Well, it's so important. And my grandpa would always say a partnership is a sinking ship. And so he would be like, you just got to be really careful who you partner with, because it can kill you if it's the wrong person or company. Max is the right person. And he grew up, he calls Utah his home, but he joined the Army at 18, became a tanker. So was in an Abrams tank and did 2 tours in Iraq.
Wow.
Was there during the initial wave of invasion in Iraq.
Wow.
So this is a guy that's like literally been on the front lines, has witnessed stuff that I hope you or I never see, and has just lived in a way to like honor the people that he served with and the people who didn't make it home, and came to the U, political science major, became a lobbyist, and then became the lobbyist, I believe, for Vivint Solar. And so he got some exposure to this crazy direct sales world.
Mm-hmm.
And a friend of his from the poli-sci department at the U had been selling for me and my little brother and working with us for a few years. And he invited Max to come sell for the summer. And the lobbying season kind of dies down in the summer here in Utah. And so I just happened to be going to grad school in Ohio when their team was selling in Columbus.
Mm.
And so, my little brother calls me up, a bunch of single guys like wanting some food, and they came over for Sunday dinner, and there was this like 27-year-old rookie that he brought with him, and that was Max. And we just struck up a friendship at that point, and then just stayed close. And he kind of went into legacy right as they began. And so we got to work together during those years, but our friendship, goes long before that. So
Yeah.
just a great guy that I know I can trust, and that has the work ethic that it takes to grow a business in this space. And just a respectable guy, great partner.
That's great. Yeah. Well, we should get him in here at some point.
You should. Yeah. He tells his story better than me. Actually, he doesn't like to tell it, so maybe I should tell it. But yeah.
Yeah. At some point we'll get him in. Well, that's great. Yeah. And having a partner that's you can rely on, you can vent with, you can just, it's almost like a therapist in some regard with starting a business. There's so much stress and everything. It can be really critical. Our group is 50-50. I've got a great partner as well, Justin. And so I know exactly what you're saying. So how old were you when you started Sunder? What year was this?
Oh geez, this was just over 5 years ago. So I was probably 32
at
32 at the time. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So young, still young. Were you, how did you feel like just making that decision? You're out of legacy. Were you nervous? Was it like, I'm all in? Was it, how are you feeling?
Yeah. It's scary. It's scary. I think I always knew from when I was an adolescent that I would own a business someday. I didn't know where or when or whatever. I wanted to be prepared for that day if it ever came. But it was scary. We're putting things on our personal credit cards and like dumping our own money in and just trying to figure this out. And this was like late summer, maybe early fall 2019. And things started to go really well for us, and we were growing it. And then COVID hits, and we're 6 months in.
Yep.
And everything stopped. And we thought this could be it. Like, we'll lose our houses. Like, we're going to lose everything. And then after about a week where it just was totally frozen, things started opening back up and we've learned how to sell through COVID. And because people were home and using a lot more electricity and kind of planning on who knows what, solar sales just skyrocketed. So it was really good for business. It was challenging because we're running teams in multiple states. Each state had a different regulation and different guidance coming out. And so we're trying to run all of these kind of mini businesses within our business, but it ended up being really good. And we kind of never looked back from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So going back to the day one, I mean, you're a week out from your job. I assume you have some savings or something, right? You and Max, I don't know. But it's like, what is like step one to starting a solar company? It's like, hey, we got to go buy some trucks, hire some sales reps. Like, how are you financing some of this stuff?
Yeah.
Like, maybe walk us through like the first 12 months of like, we got to do this.
So back then, the finance companies, when money was cheap and flowing, they were pretty good about fronting capital. If you go make a sale, you could basically get paid something the next week.
Okay.
And so we knew if we get out and really start selling, we can generate a lot of cash for our install partner, and then they would share some of that with us. And so they would kind of help us. And this is kind of how the industry works even today. It's a lot tighter today, and banks are very restrictive now. Mm-hmm. But as long as we got out and sold, it would generate some capital and we could start funding things. We've taken the approach that we're not going to get in the install game, and we're going to be asset light, and we're going to focus on sales, marketing, and technology and scale. And so we work through, at the time it was one installation partner. As we've grown and shifted strategy, now I think we have over 30 different install partners throughout the country, but they're the ones carrying a lot of the asset heavy stuff. So inventory, warehousing, trucks, bunch of W-2s, and we stay pretty asset light. I think we have 25 employees here in Utah, W-2, and then we have 55 folks out in Indonesia that work in our business every day. And then we have, something like 1,500 1099s throughout the country. Dang. So it's that's a lot. Awesome way to grow a solar sales company, because you're not wasting money on non-performers or underperformers, and you're paying those who are productive, and we give them a lot of autonomy. Like, I'm not forcing anybody to show up at a certain time or do something on a certain day, but it's proven to be pretty successful.
Yeah, that's great. So I want to walk through a solar transaction. Yeah. Going back to the earlier question. So someone knocks on a door, they make a sale.
Yep.
What is the cost of that to the consumer?
Yep.
Hey, I want to put panels on my roof. What does that cost? And how do you guys make money? How does the installer make money?
Yeah. So there are a number of different ways you can go solar, and depending on the state or the utility, some states don't allow for you to lease a system or have someone else own the system and you just kind of rent the power from them. Other states, that's the bread and butter product, the go-to product in the market. So you could buy it cash, and the average system is going to be somewhere in the $30,000, $35,000 range. Super dependent on situation and whatever. Sure. You can have a system that's $100,000 that makes sense to a customer, or $10,000 that makes sense for another. Mm-hmm. But so you can pay cash and own it. Okay. And then there are federal and sometimes local incentives that you can potentially get with that. You can finance the system to where you would own it eventually. Mm-hmm. And similar to that, there's those incentives exist there, but there are fees, interest fees, dealer fees that are attached there. So you're going to pay more money, obviously, just like with a house or a car. And then there's this third party owned world that is dominating the space right now. And that's basically, I don't have to buy the system, but I'm just agreeing to pay less for power than I'm paying if I just stay with the utility.
Okay.
And so So that transaction takes place, and then it's a whole process. And it's usually, on the really, really fast end, you can get a job done in a week or two, but usually it's like a month or two.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to do, part of the sales process, you design a system, you verify that it's matching the utility bill, and you submit for a permit at the city level.
Okay.
And then once those approvals are there and the plans have been created, it's really a mini construction project.
And is your team doing that?
So our team,
is that a third party?
Our team, usually the solar installer is doing a lot of the engineering and the site surveys and the things like that. Our reps usually interact if there's an issue or a missing document or something sensitive that needs to be communicated to the homeowner. We'll get involved. But once we've sold the deal, with most of our install partners, if it's sold right up front, you don't have to have much interaction prior to install. We recommend that our reps do, but just to maintain the relationship and make sure they're taken care of. But then it goes to install, and then after that, there's what's called permission to operate, which is granted from the utility, and then you can turn the system on and hopefully start saving money. So the solar install company usually gives the sales company what we call a red line or a baseline, which is like, here's our cost of doing business plus our margin. And then anything you sell above that, you basically get.
Okay.
The nice thing about the third party owned systems is it's very regulated on what you can charge the customer. So with all the partners we work with, you must put the customer in a first year cost savings position to sell the deal.
Okay.
So basically, like, I can sleep well at night knowing that they're going to validate this. We're checking against the utility bill and usage, and we're putting this customer in a better spot than when we met them.
Right.
And so we do that. So the installer will get paid by the finance company usually, and then we get paid from the installer.
Okay.
We kind of pioneered a new way to get paid where the finance company pays us directly and they pay the installer directly for its portion. Not all of our business is on that, but we're starting to see that kind of become a trend in the space. And that way we're not fully reliant on our installer to pay us.
Yeah, sure.
Which has been cool. So yeah, it's a lot of nuance to it, but that's generally how it works. And the solar company gets paid its commission, or the sales company, and then we pay sales reps and leaders and keep the rest for us.
Okay. So so out of the portion you get from the installer, you're paying your reps, and then the rest is coming back to corporate, or your main overhead sources.
Yeah, some gross margin there.
Yeah. Okay. And so you have probably agreements with all your installers, like here's the margin you guys are going to hit, here's what the excess would be coming back to us. Do you have a go-to installer? Does it depend on the market?
It depends on the market. Okay. Yeah. And it's been incredible, but it's also been challenging to have, dozens of installers and to keep those relationships healthy. But we just, through being in the industry for as long as we have been, we have some incredible install partners, and the finance companies have been really involved in helping us figure out like which, we call them EPC partners or install partners, are good, and those that pay well and on time and do quality work and have compliance that aligns with our values. And, it's been amazing. But yeah, they're up front, there's a contract, we know what we're getting paid, and then we kind of customize the system to each homeowner based on their needs.
Makes sense.
Yep.
And that's really helpful, Eric. So how have things been over the last 5 years? I mean, you guys, how's it going now? Has it been all up and up, or?
No. I mean, it's cliche, but people in the industry call it the solar coaster, because every year there's something. And, we had COVID, and then after COVID, there was some supply chain stuff. And then after that, we had interest rate hikes. And then after that, we had a lot of solar companies going out of business because of the kind of restricted cash, and you had a consolidation in the space. And so we've just watched the national installer landscape get smoked. The regional and the smaller installers, if they run a good, solid business on solid fundamentals, they've done really well through this. And, I think we're going to continue to see companies go out of business. And so our kind of mantra for the last 14 months has been building the most resilient company in the space. To achieve scale, it's really difficult when you have all these partnerships unless you have the right support and tech. And we feel like we've made those investments wisely. And then if there's trouble with an installer, instead of being reliant on that one installer, where if they went out of business, you'd be in a terrible spot. We might have 3% of our business through them, and we can pivot those homeowners to a new installer. And we feel like we've got a long way to go, but we do believe we have the most resilient model in the space. Yeah. And so we're getting the kind of the economies of scale of a large company. We can share that with our smaller installation partners and some of the benefits of the volume we bring to the market. Without them having to be a national installer, they can get some of those benefits. So it's been a good model.
Yeah, I think definitely thinking about the right way with some of that diversification on the installer side. And I've heard that. It's even here in the Utah market, I've seen some groups that have been in trouble or in the headlines, and so is that driven predominantly by higher interest rates and like financing groups pulling back and installers struggling?
Yeah. I mean, if you're an installer and you have a dip in sales, but you're like deep on all of this inventory and warehousing and staffing, I mean, you can burn a lot of cash very quickly in that model. And so, we're constantly thinking about our customers and customer experience. And so it's like, okay, we need to prepare for a scenario where the industry continues to kind of suffer from high interest rates and the banking environment the way it is. And so that's kind of how we pieced it together. But in looking at the landscape, it was like, okay, let's look at home building as an example. Is there a single home builder that does well nationally that can also build a custom solution for that territory that has more than 10% market share? And I mean, the answer is no. I think D.R. Horton's sub 10%, and they're the biggest traditional home builder. And, if I'm going to build a custom home, no shade to anyone that has a D.R. Horton home, but if I'm building my dream home and it's this big investment, I'm probably not calling D.R. Horton. And so it's this challenge of like, how do you get national construction to be efficient and customized and quality? We actually don't believe it's possible. We've been at it for a good decade in the solar space, and we haven't found an example where it actually worked. I mean, you even see Solar City, Tesla, like that huge name, big money, couldn't make it work. And there might be other reasons why that happened, but we just believe in local construction but we don't want to be small. So it's like, all right, let's figure this out and do it right and do right by our people and our customers. And so far that's been incredible.
Yeah, that's great.
Through a hard time. Yeah, it's been a rough time for the solar industry.
And for a lot of space. I mean, from a competition standpoint, I think, solar, the cat's out of the bag. Like it's a viable product. People like it, but there are a lot of groups specifically here in Utah, right? That are popping up. I mean, how do you think about your competition, market share, sending your guys out, recruiting? How's that been?
So we built year-round local offices for the most part. Okay. We might have 5% of our business that's seasonal, where they go out for a summer or they blitz here or there. We actually look at the utilities as our main competition. They're sort of like frenemies because we work with each other, but they don't love that we're there. But politicians usually kind of require that we can do our job. And so, you've got that, and you've got all these different dynamics that exist in the space. Like there's no one company that's doing it exactly like another. But I think because we recruit locally in our markets, like we're we're not really running into a whole lot of competition. Like it's out there, but the country has so many good people that I think when you're fishing in the Utah County kind of Intermountain West pond with 50 other companies, the way the direct sales industry kind of was built initially, it's heated, it's crazy, recruiting battles get nasty. But in our model, we see a little bit of it, but it's not a huge problem. Okay. So
yeah, it makes sense.
We just double down on the way we do things and realize that like the amount of solar competition pales into comparison to the TAM and the amount of penetration that still needs to be had throughout the country. So
I like the year-round model. I think that's smart. And I've always wondered why more groups don't do that. Cause I'm sure if you go and plant a flag in a market, you could find solid guys that or girls that want to go out and sell around the clock.
I think the hit rate in the Intermountain West is really high. So there's just the way people are, they're used to, a friend or family member in the industry. They believe that it can work for them. Mm-hmm. Whereas if I'm recruiting in New York or Massachusetts or something, it's like I'm actually introducing this concept to someone for maybe the first time. Yeah. And so to get their minds wrapped around it, instill the belief in them, show them someone that's successful. Like it's I wouldn't say it's harder. It just takes more time and more effort to get somebody up to speed. But once they are, like, there's incredible talent throughout the country.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Have you guys run into, I've heard sometimes an issue with Pest or other groups is getting over your skis and paying your reps commission because the timing of the revenue versus the commission, like the lump sum. But is that an issue for solar because you're getting paid up front, or how has that balance worked?
It can be. So most installation companies consider your commission earned at that permission to operate stage. Okay. But most companies have made multiple payments to a sales company or a sales rep up to that PTO stage. So they'll get a little up front and then a little bit at install and then maybe the remainder at PTO, or I should say a lot of it at install. That's typically what happens. And so, you'll see situations where system gets installed, sales rep gets the majority of their payment, they leave, they do something else, account never reaches PTO, and then we're getting clawed back that amount. And some of that does happen, and it's terrible. So you try and create systems and processes around that. But yeah, I think the biggest thing in the space is installers overbuilding, so overgrowing, and then sales dipping, and they weren't building those businesses for anything but up into the right growth. And like I said earlier, if you do that, you can burn a lot of cash very quickly.
Sure. Yeah. It makes sense. You guys are thinking about it the right way. What's the future look like? I mean, you guys 1,500 reps over, sounds like 75 employees or so. How are you guys thinking about the future?
Yeah, I think that resiliency thing that I mentioned has been our main focus. It's like, okay, if we can be super resilient, if we can pay on time and accurately, if we can have healthy culture and have a culture of growth and success, and happiness and honesty, we think a byproduct of that is that we will be the biggest. That's not the focus though. Like if we end up being, we kind of stick in the like, we're the 4th biggest or we're the 10th biggest. I can be okay with that as long as we're hitting those fundamentals the right way and we're doing right by our people, including our customers. But I actually think that the result will be that we have the potential to be dominant and the biggest in the space. And we just have the ability to flex up and down with the way we bring on installers. And so that's really kind of been the focus. We don't have a date scheduled on the calendar of like, we're going to sell by that day or we're going to IPO by that day. But if it made sense with the right partnership, strategic or private equity or whatever, we would probably entertain it, but that's not like the daily goal right now in the business. It's to take care of these people that have trusted us.
Yeah, love it. Have you had to raise money for the venture?
Not outside of like our little internal group that's put money in. Yeah. We bought a software company in our first year of operation. We were their first guinea pig client, and they were building free tech for us. And this is a mentor of mine from my mission days, kind of a serial SaaS entrepreneur. And it was so good. We were so addicted to this stuff that we were like, all right, we got to figure out a way to like bring this in-house, incubate it. And then my whole goal was to spin out that company as a separate company and take what I believe the direct sales world has figured out so well with employee engagement and making things fun when normally they're mundane. We need to take that to the broader world, normal, corporate structures and maybe MLM and some of these other things. And so, that's what we did. And we have a separate software business now that's doing really well. And we're out here in Silicon Slopes and adding new customers, it seems like, every week. So
yeah. So it sounds like effectively bootstrap more or less. Maybe you got a few people in, but that's great.
Yeah.
And you can keep control and ownership until you don't, you can't, or you need to, do something else. That's great.
Yeah.
That's the goal.
Yeah. It's been good.
Last few questions here, Eric. Well, I guess what advice would you give to somebody who wants to start their own direct sales company or solar company specifically? Like they're like, hey, I've got nothing. I'm starting from scratch. What are you telling that person?
Yeah, I would say be ready for a lot of sleepless nights, missing things with family and friends that you're just going to have to sacrifice to do this. Expect the unexpected, plan for the worst, prepare for the best, I think it's definitely not all that it cracks up to be. I think people are like, I want to control my own destiny and my own schedule. And I think you realize pretty quickly as a business owner, like you're at everyone's beck and call and you're there to serve. And you probably have less control of what comes to you because there's nobody else that's going to pick up the slack, especially when you're small and just getting going. I think building the right team around you is critical, but you can't really attract great talent if you don't have money to pay them or interesting things to offer them. And so, I would say invest early in a good finance person, make sure you have a good accounting firm, make sure you're getting good legal advice. And if you can't do those things, you probably shouldn't be starting a company. So I would say, there's nothing quite like it. I don't think people understand if they've never been in the seat. And I've had a lot of empathy for business owners that I've worked with in the past where I look back and I'm like, yeah, I did not understand what they were going through or the pressures that exist for them. And so I've kind of learned to have more empathy for those guys, but I've also seen it done so well at the highest level. Like Todd Peterson, I'd be at work and like, he'd stop on his way to the elevator and ask me about life and what was going on with our program and take an interest in me. And I'm like, this guy had no reason to do that. Like he doesn't need to talk to me. But kind of seeing people do it well, but also kind of at this point looking at it and realizing that like, in order for me to go be a sales rep for Todd in 2008, he was sacrificing massive things on a personal level. And it's worked out for him financially and he's got an incredible family, but like I didn't respect the amount of sacrifice he was giving at that point. And so I'd say if you want to do it, buckle up, have some money stashed away, get some good help, and then build a good, trustworthy team as quickly as your means allow and surround yourself with those good people and then go to battle. because it's a battle every single day. It's a battle.
It's a battle. That's amazing advice, Eric. And I think you're spot on. There are a lot of my buddies who work in, the 9 to 5 that I envy them sometimes because I'm like, you are making probably more money than I am right now, or at least in the early days. You're not stressed about a lot of things that I'm stressed about, but you've got to really want it. And it's sometimes it is, it isn't for everyone. And there's not, I think a lot of people think about entrepreneurship as the path to happiness or end all be all, or you have to do that to feel some sort of way. But I think that's good advice. Yeah,
if you want to feel alive, start a company and jump in.
Yeah, exactly.
There are easier ways to do that. Go to Lagoon. Go jump on a roller coaster.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
Well, speaking about money, how do you think about money? I don't know, your situation or what have you, but when you think about what role that plays in your life or how that motivates you or what the end game is, I mean, how are you thinking about that in your business and your life?
Yeah. I mean, I've always been a saver and like frugal and an investor. I remember when I was a kid, I had a bank bag that my dad got me from First Security Bank. And I would just stash cash under my mattress and plan for a rainy day. And that kind of has stuck with me through the years. But as I've gotten more educated on investing and whatnot, I try and invest as quickly and as frequently as I can for the purpose of, not necessarily buying a supercar or anything like that, but I want to be able to give of my time as early as possible in my life. So I'm not able to do as much of that right now as I'm building businesses and trying to grow them. But if I can get there somewhat early in my life, I think if I'm called upon or if I see an opportunity to jump in and serve and do good with my life, I want to be able to do whatever I want. And I think in order to be able to give of your time, you have to have the resources to pay the bills and eat and travel and whatever. And so, doing everything I can to make sure I'm investing well. I'm putting a lot of that investment into my own businesses, which is probably more risky than just dumping it into an index fund and letting it grow slowly. But I think I guess I'm diversified in a lot of high risk things. And someday I hope it's not that way. But yeah, I think that's it. Like I pay really close attention to successful people. I guess I judge them in a way. I'm not judging like their eternal destiny, but I'm judging how they move and how they treat their family and what they had to sacrifice. And I'm just obsessed with like where people are from and what kind of family did they grow up in and what lessons did they learn? Like it's fascinating to me. And I don't think there's a single person I can think of that was just given everything, that has grit, that has determination, that has humility. And so I'm not looking to like leave my kids with a ton of money and just give them things. I want my kids to have grit and tenacity and kindness and these things that are developed through hard work and trials and stress and love and hope and these things we can instill in them. So I think to kind of put a pin in it, the goal is to be able to give of my time as soon as I possibly can. And to get there, I need to have the resources to do it. So that's the focus.
Yeah, I love that. It's really well said and a great motivating factor to get where you want to get to. Last question, Eric, and I asked most of my guests this, is just think about, and you've touched on this a little bit with your last answer there, but when you think about success in your life and how you want to be remembered or define a life well lived, I mean, how do you define success?
It's a good question. I think if I ended my life with $1 billion and my family struggled or hated me, or I, tarnished the relationships that matter most in my life, I would be a failure. I wouldn't just feel like a failure. I would be a failure. I have this image in my mind of the man that I committed to be before coming to this world. And I kind of have this vision in my mind of the finished product, Eric standing next to that man that I committed to be, to my maker. If that happened, I imagine that happening, and I hope that we're not too different. I hope I didn't disappoint him or anyone in my life along the way too badly or fail them too much. But I think I did a day hike or a morning hike with a mentor of mine who has run businesses at the highest levels. I think he was a billionaire at one point. I've never seen his bank account, but he's super successful. And he said, my goal in life is to make my wife say that I am her best friend, because she's always been my best friend. But because of what I've had to do and sacrifice to build businesses, I don't think she would call me her best friend. So my life's goal is to make her that. And I thought that was really good. And it woke me up so that I could evaluate how I treat my wife and kids and try to make the necessary changes to be a better man. So I think that's it. It's not going to be the money. It's not going to be the assets or the businesses. It's going to be the relationships. And most importantly, with God, with family, with close friends. And I think I got over this a while ago. Casey, I remember meeting with Seabaugh, and he's like, Eric, at the time Donald Trump was president, he's like, Donald Trump is hated by hundreds of millions of people in this world, but he's the most powerful man probably in the world. And so you got to learn, if you're going to do big things, you're going to make an impact. There are going to be haters. There are going to be people that don't like you. There are going to be people that don't want to be around you. You have to learn how to be okay with that and to do what you believe in your soul is right and best. And so I've taken that conversation, and I've been at peace with who I am and with the relationships I have in my life. So that's success to me.
No better way to end. Thanks for sharing your story, Eric. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.